Thank you for being here today. I'm going, if you are at the Zoom data meeting or Zoom meeting for the training on English learner data in eSchool, then you're at the right location. And I am getting ready to start recording, but I'm going to pull up the script, the presentation first, and then we will start recording. So. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. As we go, if you have questions. Okay. Thank you for being here today. I am sharing with you the presentation that was shared at the ADE Data Conference on August 3rd and 4th. It is the same presentation, but I wanted to make sure the information was available to those who could not attend the conference. So let's get started.
I'm pretty much working on my own phone.
Okay, if you would please mute your mics, I might be able to mute everybody. I don't. Okay, thank you. I think everyone's muted now. Okay. Today our goal is to inform you about the expectations that ADE has regarding data reporting related to language minority students and English learners for the 2017-18 school year. The first thing is that we do expect all districts to enter their ESOL coordinator contact information in eFinance. That includes their name, email, phone number, and fax number. There was separate training at the data conference on how to accomplish this. You can refer to pages 32 to 33 of the 2017-18 SIS manual. This is the list that feeds into the feature on ADE's site. The main website has a feature where you can look up contact information for any district in the state, and that includes ESOL coordinator contact information. Funds for the 2017-18 year state ELL funds are based on the number of English learners that you identify in each school district. We determine the number of English learners utilizing Cycle 2 data that we retrieve from eSchool. This year, the funding is $338 per English learner student in grades K through 12. There will be a separate commissioner's memo coming out about the process for verifying your data and that process. So thank you. One reason that we use eSchool now is that for our data collection is we are trying to make sure that we only ask you for information about students one time, and that we use that system eSchool for a lot of our data collection. Note, all Arkansas students must complete individual home language surveys upon initial enrollment in Arkansas schools. So that is required for every student when they first enroll in an Arkansas school. Here are the cycle reports that contain information regarding English learners. The first one is called the District National Origin Report. It is basically a statement of assurances that your district completes. There is another training on the data conference website about how to complete that report, along with other equity assistance reports. The other reports on here, district and school level student ELL information, and the home language report. Would you please make sure you're muted? Thank you. Okay, the school and district EL information and home language, you can see the EL information is gathered on cycles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The home language we gather primarily on cycle 2. We also gather information from cycle reports about dropouts, retention, school-age students, those are students in special education, etc. that we need. Any of that information we need is gathered from various cycle reports for federal reporting requirements. One thing we are often asked about at the state is, what do we do with our foreign exchange students? You are to treat these students as you would any other student concerning screening, identifying, and serving with EL services. Just as any other student, they must complete a home language survey upon their initial enrollment in an Arkansas school, and you screen them if anything other than English is indicated. Then you place in ESOL services if they are qualified to do so. Parents and guardians always have a right to decline services, as do all other parents. There is a link here, and I will email out the presentation to those attending, as well as post the presentation on ADE's website. In the document, the PDF, you will be able to link on the serving foreign exchange students to obtain the information about what federal laws, etc., are behind why we screen, test, and serve foreign exchange students. Okay, so this brings us to what we must do about identifying language minority students and English learners. All districts must have a process for identifying your potential English learners. Your potential English learners are your language minority students. So to do that, you administer a home language survey to all students. You do this once upon their initial enrollment. You do not have to do it every year. Then you screen those who answer anything other than English on their home language survey with a state-approved screener or placement test. What you do with the home language survey is you make sure your ESOL coordinator knows about any student with any answer other than English. You file a copy in the student's cumulative folder for all students, whether they responded all English or if they included answers other than English. If any language other than English is indicated, you enter that language in the eSchool home language field on the student tab in registration. Otherwise, you enter English in the eSchool home language field. I will show you an example of this field in just a few slides. If a guardian indicates preference for communication in a language other than English, you enter that chosen language in the eSchool guardian contact information under the General Information tab, and I will show you that in just a minute. One thing you need to do, though, is consider some caveats for determining whether or not a student is a language minority student. It is highly recommended that you conduct some kind of parent interview to verify language responses other than English if truly being a language minority student is in question. I'll give you some examples of why it might be in question. There are some students that you know, this is a language minority student, it's very obvious, they're communicating with you or with each other, with their parents in another language, and so it's very clear they are a language minority student. But there are some that it's not as clear because they appear on the surface to be at least using English. You don't hear them or see them interacting in a language other than English. Maybe only one response on the home language survey was other than English. Then you might want to verify the responses of why they put the other language and to tell you more about that language usage other than English. Another thing I want to mention here is that even for students who put all English on their home language survey, if you have evidence to support that they use a language other than English or that someone in their household uses a language other than English around them, then you may document that on what we will be releasing in the near future, what's called an English learner referral form, so that if there's a language other than English, but the home language survey is all English, you may still screen them. In fact, you are still required to screen them if you have any evidence that there's a language other than English. Just for the vast majority of our language minority students, we find out about them via this home language survey. More information about that process will come out in Commissioner's memos this year as we roll out common entry and exit criteria as part of our ESSA plan. So if you've gotten information that you think that they're a language minority student, but you visit with them and determine that, no, this student is all English, there is no significant language usage other than English at all at home, or it's only been to add another language after they've already learned English, then you may document why the other language was indicated on the home language survey, file that documentation with the student's home language survey, and record English for the home language in eSchool. And here are some examples of when that may happen. Okay, one that I reference is called Dora the Explorer reason for putting Spanish on the home language survey. In this case, the student is not a language minority student. The reason I've seen this happen is, and I highly encourage families to do this, they may be wanting their children to learn languages other than English, and so they have done things like have them use the app, apps like Duolingo, or watch shows like Dora the Explorer, or take some classes to add a language other than English to that child's repertoire. And if that's the case, and they're adding the language other than English after they've already been learning English, then they're not a language minority student. Okay, another example is, let's say the home language survey indicates French was spoken in the home. Upon visiting with the child and family, you discover that French was listed because their family is learning French in order to visit France in the future. So this is an example of not being a language minority student. And you could just document the reason they put French was to learn some French in order to visit France, not because they're a language minority student. And you would not screen the student, and you would indicate English as their home language. Okay, another example, let's say you have a 5th grade student. They were in an English-only home until 2 years ago when dad remarried and the stepmom speaks Spanish fluently. So one way to think about a lot of these questions is think about what was the language environment for that child during the, especially before kindergarten, from birth to about age 5, when they were acquiring their initial language. If they were around only English during that time period and later Spanish was added, then they're not a language minority student, most likely. If they were exposed to 2 languages at home, or a language other than English before kindergarten, then they are a language minority student. So this 5th grade student, dad remarried and stepmom has been in their life now for 2 years and speaks Spanish, they're not a language minority student. With this next example, the child grew up in a Marshallese speaking home until they were 4, and then they were adopted by an English-only family. This is a language minority student. Even if now the student is in 8th grade and doesn't remember any Marshallese, until they can test out and show that language proficiency is no longer an issue, they are considered a language minority student. In fact, they will always be considered a language minority student. They may eventually test out of English learner status. Okay, here's another example. A kindergarten student comes from a home where Spanish is spoken by the parents. The student is very limited in any language due to a possible disability, so it's hard to test for any language proficiency, whether in English or their home language. This is still a language minority student. Their disability does not prevent them from being a language minority student. We know this is an area that we need to look at alternate ways to exit English learner status in the future, but currently the only way to exit English learner status if you're a language minority student is to test as proficient or to meet the state exit criteria. Okay, I do see that person's question and I will answer it when we get to the monitoring stage. Okay. So here's a summary of how you identify language minority students in eSchool. They've completed a home language survey. If they have any answer other than English, you verify it if needed. So if they're a language minority student, you do two things. You enter their other language as home language, and all that means, home language, that is the language on the home language survey that has qualified them to be a language minority student. It is not a judgment call on how proficient they are in that language or if that's their preferred language or their dominant language. That this field does not tell you anything like that. It solely tells you that they have a language other than English indicated, and that is considered their home language for home language survey reporting purposes. Then you also in eSchool, you will check the ESL box on the personal screen. The ESL box, all that it means is that ESL needs to screen or has screened this language minority student. It does not mean that they are an ESL student, that they're an English learner. It just means that ESL needs to or has screened this student. Okay, these two fields, once you verify that they're really a language minority student, home language and the ESL box in the personal screen never get changed. You leave them that way. Okay, someone is asking if there was a way to label the box that says ESL in eSchool to label it LMS, as it throws a lot of people off. I know it does. It is a field that we, as of right now, are not able to edit the label on the field. There are some things we can edit and others we cannot. And that is one of the things we are currently told we cannot. But I will continue looking into it. Okay, so here is the student tab and showing where you would enter the home language. Okay, you can see where the 1 is, the home language. Any language other than English on their home language survey must be listed, otherwise it defaults to English. Then the language of correspondence. There are a couple of places you may enter this. This is one of them. As a district, you need to decide and be consistent where you're entering language of correspondence. This is on the student tab. You can indicate their preferred language on box 2, and you can see on one side it says language of correspondence. You can indicate it. You may also check use language for mailing if it's not English. It defaults to English. Otherwise, if you want it to be some other language, you may check that box. Another place you may put preferred language is on the Guardian screen. Now I'm on the Guardian tab. It says language of correspondence where 3 is, as well as that check use language for mailing. If it's not English, you may check it there. The key to this is that you need to be consistent in your district about where you are entering language of correspondence. This is a field that can change over time, so I encourage you to have a process within your district to update that regularly, to ask parents what they prefer on a regular basis, like once a year or so, or have a method for them to tell you when they want it something other than what they've been receiving. And then when you send letters home from, some are generated from eSchool. There are some letters you can have put in there, for instance, in Spanish, that it would then generate the letter in Spanish. The other reason people use these fields is they might have a service like ParentLink or some other parent notification system for phone calls, and there's a way that you tell those programs which kids you call in English and which kids' homes you call in Spanish or Marshallese or whatever language it is that you are providing interpretation for. And you just need to know for sure what language of correspondence field you are pulling from to inform those programs of what language to send home communication in. Do not use the student's home language tab field. You will have issues if you use the student's home language field, because you will have students whose language is something other than English, say Spanish, but now their family prefers and needs their communication in English. To fix that, you make sure you're pulling from the language of correspondence field, not the home language field. Okay, and then the last thing you do besides the language being home language being language other than English, you check that ESL box that's in the middle of the screen for any student who's considered a language minority student. So then once you know who your language minority students are, you need to conduct screening of those students. The ELPA 21 screener became available August 1st. It is required no later than when you begin screening students for the 2018-19 school year. It is highly recommended that your district transition to using the ELPA 21 screener as soon as possible. Until you transition, you may continue to use the legacy screeners that are listed here, the LOS, the MAC2, or the TELPA. If you use one of those legacy screeners, you must use the published proficiency cut scores from those test manufacturers or test publishers' manuals as the proficiency cuts. We have to be using common proficiency cuts, and so how we've determined that as part of ESSA, and so for this point forward, you either use the published cuts in the legacy screener or you use the ELPA 21 screener. There is training on the ELPA 21 screener available from ADE and from Alan Lytle, and in the live binder for ELPA 21, which you may find at arkansased.org, and look for ELPA 21.
They don't even have any information.
Okay, please mute. Someone asked if non-certified staff members may administer the legacy test and or ELPA screener. Someone who is trained in administering the test may administer the test. For the screener, there is not a requirement currently for that person to be a certified staff member, just a requirement that they be trained in administering the assessment. So once you have the information, you've screened the student, now it's time to go enter information in the ELL screen. And you find that by going to Student Center, Demographic, and select ELL. And if you need to, you can search for the student you're working on, update the data, and then click Save. This is what that screen looks like. Okay, notice when you pull this screen up, there's the ELL entry exit, and there's a, right now for this student, it says no. There's a blue no underlined. It's a hyperlink to another screen. If this field says no, that means that as far as we know, when we're looking at the data, this is not a current English learner. Either they never were an English learner, or they have an entry and exit date on the EL program screen and they're a former English learner. If it's a yes, then this student is a current English learner, and they only have an entry date and value box checked on the EL program screen, which we will look at. In order to get to that EL program screen, you click on this no or yes. I will answer questions as we get to the end if they don't fit in with the context of what we're discussing as we're going through. So you open the EL program screen and this is what you see. Notice the orange arrow is pointing to the start date field. That is the date the student entered a U.S. school for the first time, regardless if the entry was in an Arkansas or another state. So wherever they entered a U.S. school for the first time, you do your best to figure out what that date is. If you're doing an intake interview on a family and you find out, they're a third grader now, and you find out, yes, we started kindergarten in Georgia, and you know the school, they've seen some report cards, and they came from Georgia and they have kindergarten report cards. Then you just pick a date that approximates the beginning of their kindergarten year. It can be the same date you would have begun kindergarten in your school district that year, and that can be their entry date. In other words, you don't have to have some official record from their prior school district that states this is the day they began school. Do the best educated estimate of that date and put that date. Okay. Then you will screen the student, and if they qualify as an English learner, you will check the value box. That's the blue arrow. You must check the value box. Otherwise, if you just have a start date, that prior screen will say no, they're not an English learner.
Yeah.
So they have to have a start date and they have to check the value box to be an English learner. The end date is after the student meets state criteria for fluent English proficient status and they're exited from the ESL or ESOL program, they no longer qualify to receive services. The end date can also be the date that they test as if they initially come to you in kindergarten, and the first day of school might be 8/14/07, but you didn't screen them until about 2 weeks later on 8/28/17. Then you would indicate, once you decided on 8/28/17 that they are proficient, then that would be their end date. So there could only be a couple weeks difference between the start and end date. There'll be some students like that. Most of the students, the end date will be a few years after the start date. Once you click the end date, this value box disappears. The check needs to disappear. It will disappear once you have both in here and click save, but you need to just verify it's saying no as you anticipate. So here's an example of a correctly entered start date and value to indicate that this is an English learner. Okay, so there's a start date, the value box is checked, this is an English learner. This is what we are looking for when ADE pulls data for testing or assessment related items or for accountability items. We are looking for this combination to be considered an English learner. As long as they have this, then they're an English learner. When a student withdraws from your district, you leave this because they might come back. You don't ever take this out. You do not put an end date when they leave your district. You only put an end date when they meet exit criteria. This is a non-example. Notice that the value box is not checked. That's a big, this kid would show up as not an English learner. Okay, so this is a non-example of how to indicate an English learner. Okay, we're going back to the EL program screen or the EL screen, and you can see there's some other fields here. There's an ESL, EL waive date. And what this is the date. If an EL student's parent signs a form waiving ESL, ESOL services for a student, then you will indicate the date they signed that form in here. They only have to sign that form once. You don't need to obtain that signature every year. You do need to annually inform them of their child's progress every year, just as you do with all other English learners. But you do not provide direct services to them, and you put that waive date here. For students who have been exited from ESL services and whose academic progress is being monitored for 4 years in the regular educational classroom as required by federal law, and this includes language minority students who were initially placed as exited from EL services and never classified as an English learner in their K-12 history or in Arkansas. So the first 4 years that you know a student is no longer an English learner. They are monitored. When they're monitored, they will have an entry date and an exit date, and they are not an English learner. Okay? They are a former English learner when they're at monitored status. You monitor them for 4 years. Each year you have to go in and change those fields to go from monitored year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3, year 3 to year 4, and after year 4 you just remove the monitored M4 status, but you leave all the information. You do not remove their entry and exit date. You do not remove their home language or the ESL box checked on the program screen.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Please mute your line. This is an example of a monitored year 1 student correctly filled out. Notice there's a start date and end date. The value box is empty. And then on the top of the screen, on the EL screen, it says monitored year 1. So this is a correctly entered monitored year 1 type student.
Oh, nice.
Exit criteria. This year, we are transitioning to updated exit criteria throughout the school year, but we will send information out when that's available. Until then, we are continuing to use the prior exit criteria with the explanations that an ELPA 21 proficiency profile score of proficient is what is considered for the English language proficiency score. And then on English language arts and math, their ACT Aspire score of ready or exceeding, or the 40th percentile or above, if that's available. Please mute your line. Then on English language arts and math, the ITBS score of 40th percentile or above, if that's available, and grades of C or above, if that's available, grades of C or above in core content classes from their prior semester or year. Another field that needs to be indicated on eSchool is regarding immigrant. An immigrant, as defined by the U.S. Department of Education, is a student who is between the ages of 3 and 21. They were not born in any state. They have not attended one or more schools in any one or more states for more than 3 full academic years. This field is reported as a yes/no, and I'll show you in just a minute where that is. Note, not all English learners are immigrant, and not all immigrant students are English learners. So this goes beyond the scope of just an ESOL coordinator, ESOL department's responsibility. You may have students, for example, who transfer or come to your district from English-speaking countries or English-speaking environments in those countries. And they are not English learners, but they are immigrants, and they need to be indicated as such. The attending school, 1 or more states for more than 3 full academic years. This is cumulative time, not consecutive time. So you add up the amount of time that they have been in a U.S. school, and until it reaches 3 years, they're considered a recent immigrant. Otherwise, they are no longer an immigrant by this definition. Here is where you enter that information. Actually, you check the box. If you check it, it means yes, they're an immigrant. If it's not checked, it means no. So that is on the personal information screen, and that is where you would indicate whether they're an immigrant. Just a reminder that the immigrant status is not dependent on English learner status. A recent immigrant may be an EL student, they may be fluent English proficient, or they may be an English only student. So this is just a reminder that it's not just ESOL program staff who maintains this data entry point. Whether or not immigrant status is checked impacts data that we report on to the federal level on our students, as well as potentially qualifying for recent immigrant Title III funds that are separate from Title III funds otherwise. And the only way that we can determine who qualifies for a recent immigrant Title III grant is based on the students who have been reported as an immigrant in this field. This is just a reminder of the approved state EL funding expenditures. You may use the funds for items that are listed here. You cannot supplant your obligations to provide a teacher for a student. And what that means is, let's say you have a 4th grade teacher who has an ESL endorsement, and they're working with you assign most of your English learners in 4th grade in a building to that teacher. They have to have a 4th grade teacher. So you may not pay part of that teacher's salary from EL funds. The bottom item, which I will mention here, about selecting language appropriate instructional and supplemental materials, including computer assisted technology. It's fine if you purchase these for EL students as long as it is above and beyond what you are doing for any other student. For example, some schools may decide we're going to go one-to-one computing devices. It would not be appropriate in those instances to use EL funds to buy the EL student's device and other funds to buy the other devices. But if you decided, in a building that wasn't one-to-one, that you wanted your EL students to have a device in order to, use apps on a regular basis or translation tools or to have materials read to them, there's a variety of reasons why someone may want to do that are legitimate, then you can use EL funds to purchase those devices for students to use if it's not part of a general one-to-one computing or one-to-one device program. And here are some of the other approved expenditures that you may use your state EL funding for. The Title III funds are federal funds. We use this data from eSchool to determine the Title III counts. And this current school year, you had to have 114 English learners in the prior school year in order to receive Title III funds. You may contact Miguel Hernandez for more information about that program and for how to fill out the application and budget sheets and all that goes along with that. If you need more information about the ESOL program, everything from programming to what documentation you need to keep, to how you work, what needs to be in place about working with special needs students, etc. That's on the ESOL program guide that is contained on ADE's English Learners website. And you can consult the special needs funding rules, which I just referenced, and how you may spend funding as well on the English Learners website. This is our team of support staff that we have at ADE to officially support you as you are out in the districts serving our English learners and language minority students. You can see our contact information and emails here. I referred to Dr. Lytle earlier, and he is our EL assessment specialist and can help you with all things related to Alpha 21, whether it's the screener or the summative assessment we give every spring, or other assessment items such as accommodations. Okay, some questions that I want to make sure I address. The slide presentation will be available online. It is currently at the data conference website, which is on appscan.org. They have all the presentations from the data conference, but I can email you the link to that. This presentation will be posted on ADE's English Learner page shortly. It will take a little bit of time to get there. Someone asked if we can consider level 4 and 5 proficient on the MAC 2. I do not have that handbook in front of me at the moment. If that is what MAC 2 has reported as being considered proficient, then yes. I think I have answered everyone's questions. Are there any other questions before I sign off? Okay. The deadline for data entry. Okay, the deadline for it basically is cycle 2 is based on your October 1 numbers. It is reported, actually submitted by October 15th by your SIS data person in your district. So I know no later than October 15th, it has to be correct for the October 1 data. Just as a reminder, you do have to screen new students within the first and place and notify parents of placement within the first 30 days of school or within their first 2 weeks of enrollment if they enroll after the beginning of the school year. So data entry should be kept updated on a regular basis. And cycle 2 is our first pull, but then we pull the first of the month, which is reported on the 15th of the month, most months of the school year. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I'm always open to questions, or if you have suggestions, we look forward to hearing that. Keep an eye out on commissioner's memos this year for information about common entry and exit criteria, information about the ESL, the English Proficiency Indicator for our ESSA plan, as well as other information that's being updated this year as we transition to education under ESSA. So thank you and have a great start to your school year.